Welcome to my channel. Today we are telling the Mac horror story of Jack and Daniels. Daniels was just your everyday guy. He was born in Scotland, but moved down to London to pursue his dream of becoming an actor. Unfortunately, he spent more time waiting tables than treading the boards, although he did manage to land a few small film roles. In the meantime, he took whatever work he could get to make ends meet, and one night he found himself working security at a nightclub called The Box. It wasn't exactly upmarket, but it paid the bills. One night Daniels was working outside as a bouncer when a man tried to enter the club without paying. When Daniel asked him for £5, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card with the name Jack on it. "Here you go," said the man. "Tell me who sent you this." And with that, he sauntered inside. Naturally, Daniels felt like a bit of a chump, but the man had obviously got connections and it wasn't worth making an enemy of him. He shrugged off the experience and returned to his post. A few minutes later, 3 men came out of the club, stumbled over their feet, and began to fight. They were all drunk and causing a scene, so Daniel stepped in to break up the fight. One of them lashed out at him and scratched him across the face. Daniel threw him back into the melee until he calmed down. Then he noticed the man from earlier standing there watching them, a smirk playing on his lips. As the other 2 men left, the man approached the one who had been thrown out and beckoned to Daniel. "This guy attacked me and my friends. Are you sure you want to let him go?" he said. Daniel looked at the cut on his face and shook his head, but the man simply smiled and disappeared into the crowd. The next day, Daniel woke up feeling groggy. He went to work in the restaurant, where his boss chewed him out because he hadn't shown up for his shift the night before. Daniel apologized and explained what had happened. His boss still wasn't happy, but eventually relented. Later that day, Daniel got a call saying that someone wanted to speak to him urgently. He rushed home and found the man from the club waiting for him. Daniel instantly recognized him, and his heart skipped a beat. "Was he here about last night? What did he want?" "Are you all right?" the man asked. "Do you feel sick?" Confused, Daniel shook his head. "I thought maybe you might. I gave your attacker my number last night. He phoned me this morning and told me he and his mates had spiked your drink. He was wondering if you wanted to go to hospital." Daniel's eyes widened. Spiked? He couldn't remember much from the night before. Just a blurry recollection of faces, loud music and laughter. Then he remembered collapsing after trying to break up that fight. Had these men put something in his drink? That's why he felt so sick. The man saw the confusion in Daniel's eyes and pressed him. "Did you have a drink last night? Do you feel okay now?" Daniel racked his brain, trying to think back. "Yes, I remember having a couple of pints. I don't feel too good now, actually." The man nodded sympathetically. "Good. Because I was worried you might have taken something. Listen, I'm sorry about what happened last night. You were very brave stepping in to help those guys. I just want to help make things right for you. Would you like to come to dinner with me tonight? We can go somewhere quiet, somewhere nice, and you can tell me all about it." Daniel hesitated, then agreed, and later that evening, they dined in a fancy French restaurant, sipping wine and eating ice. All the while, Daniel couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Who was this guy and what did he want? Was he really trying to help, or was there something more sinister at play? As the evening wore on, Daniel became increasingly uneasy. Jack was handsome, charming, and extremely wealthy. He dressed immaculately and spoke several languages. But there was something about him that didn't sit right with Daniel. He had a strange glint in his eye, and his smile never reached it. His hands were always on Daniel, lingering on his arm or shoulder just a little too long, and his compliments, though seemingly innocent, made Daniel uncomfortable. As the night wore on, Daniel grew more and more agitated. He excused himself to the restroom, splashing cold water on his face to calm down. What was wrong with him? Why did he feel so uneasy around this man? As he dried his face with a paper towel, he noticed a faint scar above the man's right eyebrow. It was barely visible, almost invisible, yet Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he had seen that scar before. He returned to his table and continued to eat, but his appetite had vanished. He pushed his plate away and stood up, excusing himself again. This time, he went outside for some fresh air. As he leaned against the wall of the building, he took a deep breath and tried to relax, but it was no use. Something was off. and he couldn't put his finger on it. Suddenly, he heard a commotion coming from inside the restaurant. He turned and watched as several men in black suits filed out the door. Their faces were grim, and they were talking in hushed tones. A sense of dread washed over Daniel. What had he gotten himself involved in? As the men passed by, one of them glanced at Daniel. His eyes narrowed, and Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. Who were these men, and why were they here? Before he could dwell on the question any longer, one of the men approached him. His face was stern and unforgiving, and his eyes seemed to bore into Daniel's soul. "Jack asked us to bring you home," he said gruffly. Daniel stammered, taken aback by the man's abruptness. I don't understand." The man's expression didn't change. "He wants you home," he repeated, his voice like gravel. Daniel felt a surge of panic. Was Jack in trouble? Had those thugs from the club come back for him? Or was there something else, something more sinister? Without another word, the man turned and walked back to the car. Daniel hesitated for a moment, torn between his desire to help Jack and his growing fear. What if this was a trap? What if he was being lured into something dangerous? But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to go. With a deep breath, he decided to trust Jack and followed the man to the car. As Daniel climbed into the back seat of the car, he noticed a duffel bag in the corner. Curiosity got the better of him, and he reached out to inspect it. The man in the front seat turned around and gave him a sharp look. "Don't touch that," he said curtly. "It's nothing to do with you." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Why was the man being so secretive? What was in the bag? As the car pulled away, Daniel tried to calm his racing thoughts. What was going on? Why was Jack acting so strangely? Suddenly, he remembered the scar he had seen earlier. It was the same scar as the man who had tried to attack him in the club. And as he looked at the man's face, he realized he knew him. He was one of the men who had fought outside the club. The others were probably in the other cars following them. As the realization dawned on him, a surge of adrenaline shot through his body. What had he gotten himself involved in? Was this a setup? Was Jack in danger? Questions raced through his mind, but there were no answers. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the crunch of the tires on the road. Daniel's mind raced. Should he have listened to his gut instincts? Was it too late to escape? The questions echoed in his mind, but there were no answers. As the car turned into a secluded driveway, Daniel's fears were confirmed. He was trapped. There was nowhere to run. The car came to a stop, and the man in the front seat turned around. His face was grim. "Get out," he said curtly. Daniel hesitated for a moment, torn between his desire to help Jack and his growing fear. What if this was a trap? What if he was being lured into something dangerous? But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to go. With a deep breath, he decided to trust Jack and followed the man to the house. It was a large Victorian mansion, dark and imposing against the backdrop of the twilight sky. Daniel hesitated on the doorstep, unsure of what to expect. What had he gotten himself into? As the door opened, he was met with a sight that made him gasp. Inside the house sat Jack, slumped over a table, his face pale and lifeless. A single candle flickered nearby, casting long shadows on the wall. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Was Jack dead? What had happened to him? The man behind him cleared his throat. "He's gone," he said quietly, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Daniel felt a surge of panic. What had they done to Jack? How could this be?